Hello, my name is James Kemp. I am working on a project which includes both live production and film versions of my original Photoplay script titled The Dead of Spoon River, Gossip from the Grave. This is a first edition of Edgar Lee Masters' book of poetry called Spoon River Anthology. The anthology was published in 1914. It contains about 245 poem epitaphs of imaginary people who live in a small town in Illinois around the turn of the century, and the town's name was Spoon River. In the 1960s, Hollywood actor, director, writer Charles Aidman created a play version in which he incorporated the poems, not all of them, but many of them, into a Broadway production which he titled Edgar Lee Masters' Spoon River Anthology. The Aidman version opened at the Booth Theater in New York City in 1963. It was well received. This is a copy of the playbill from that production. In the 1970s, when I was a young English teacher at a small high school in Illinois, many of my students came from little communities that were located along the Spoon River. Primarily, Edgar Lee Masters' subject matter included the cemeteries in two little towns. One was Lewiston, Illinois, where the Oak Hill Cemetery is located, and one was Petersburg, Illinois, where the Oakland Cemetery is located. During the time that I taught at this small high school in Illinois, I was also working on my master's degree in English literature from Western Illinois University in Macomb, Illinois. One of my graduate level professors was Dr. John Hallwas. Dr. Hallwas is the editor of the current annotated version of Spoon River Anthology, and it contains the results of the research that he did in attempting to determine who the people might be in reality that Masters was writing about in his poems. Like Charles Aidman, I myself became interested in producing some sort of theatrical endeavor involving some of the characters in Spoon River Anthology. The Aidman version typically has 17 characters or so being performed by 4 actors. It is a rather extensive dramatic presentation. My own thoughts on that subject are that the subject matter of the poetry itself is the most important thing, and the poems stand by themselves, and they can maybe, in my opinion, best be presented in a Reader's Theater format. However, the first dramatized version of Spoon River Anthology that I wrote in 1998. It was scheduled to be produced at the On-Broadway Theater in Coos Bay, but it was not possible to obtain enough good male actors to complete that production. I waited until I had retired in 2013 and brought out the project again and began reading a different book by Vachel Lindsay, another Illinois author. Back in the 1920s, Vachel Lindsay wrote The Art of the Moving Picture, and Vachel Lindsay, as a poet himself, was proposing a new aesthetic involving a new genre of literature, namely the moving picture, as he called it. Vachel Lindsay had many standards that he thought should go into a moving picture that included everything from background music to action to content to visual content, and this book inspired me to rewrite my dramatic presentation and turn it into what I call a photoplay. In short, I have selected 45 of the poems and the introduction chorus, which is titled The Hill, using the aesthetic concepts that Vachel Lindsay proposes in his book. I have created the video content for what is becoming a film and 3 live productions. I have cast the production to include some of the well-known local actors in the Salem, Oregon area, and we will be working entirely with my script, which I titled, again, The Dead of Spoon River, Gossip from the Grave. This is the entrance to the Oak Hill Cemetery in Lewiston, Illinois. Many of the townsfolk who lived in Lewiston and who are buried in this cemetery were used by Masters as a basis for his poems. It is now possible to download a map of the Oak Hill Cemetery from the internet. Many of the markers in Oak Hill Cemetery are tagged with numbers, and the numbers correspond with the map and identify some of the real people that may have been the subject of the poems. Many of the early microphoto plays that I created for The Dead of Spoon River did not contain music and were created with an animation program through PowerPoint. One of the earliest problems I encountered was including the words of the poems themselves in the microphoto plays. But since the microphoto plays were intended to be background for live readers, the words themselves had to be enhanced so that the average audience could read them. The result was a consistent format for presenting the poems within each of the microphoto plays, and this technique was used for all of the poems in the photo plays. Next, I created microphoto play versions that included some classical music. Finally, after my trip to Illinois in November of 2018, I returned to Oregon with a collection of new footage, and I decided to develop a system of presentation involving assigning avatars from historic photographs to each of the 45 characters in The Dead of Spoon River. original production of Dead of Spoon River was scheduled for October 2018. Unfortunately, the facility where the production was to take place was not available for that production, and I decided to return to Illinois in November. When I returned from my trip to Illinois in November 2018, I had lots of new video footage and photographs of the actual places where Spoon River Anthology takes place, and I incorporated those into one of the early advertisements for a production and filming of Spoon River. These are some of the early posters designed for the production of The Dead of Spoon River. None of these are being used. This is the final version of the poster that will be used for the actual production. This video segment is being used to develop some of the staging for the live production and the film of the upcoming production of The Dead of Spoon River, Gossip from the Grave. This is a diagram of the staging design for lighting and for the original concept of using projectors. This is being replaced with a large screen color flat television. This aerial photograph was taken by one of the descendants of the original characters featured in Spoon River Anthology. Edgar Lee Masters' father was not friends with the editor of a local newspaper, and the descendant of that person has taken this photograph. The following photographs were photographs that I took over a period of years during my trips back to see family and to visit Spoon River country in west central Illinois.